Alright, what is up, pilots across the world? Welcome to a very first episode of 2024. Thank you so much for tuning in, and most importantly, for showing your love and support in this journey so far. Even though we just started only a little while ago, I have to say this, guys. Every single one of you who has tuned in, or shared the link, or hit the subscribe button, I'm truly and humbly thankful for all the encouragement that you guys have shown so far. Keep the love coming. It means more than the world to me. And as you can see, we're just getting started, so stay tuned, stay excited, because the magic has just begun and there's a lot more to come. So keeping up with that, I would like to introduce you to our very first Ask Me Anything episode. This is a format that I plan to bring in occasionally to my audiences across the platforms, from wherever you're listening in, or wherever you're tuning in, or wherever you get your podcast. The point of this one being that oftentimes you as a listener have your own thoughts to add on, or even some curiosities that need to be answered. And instead of me replying individually to one single pilot at every single time, I thought, since we are all about knowledge sharing in this show, why not bring it out to a wider audience and let them have an idea of, well, what is it all about? So, Ask Me Anything episode is basically where I take questions from you that you send in to my email ID, which is mentioned in the show notes in the description box below. Then either myself, if I have the required knowledge on the topic, or otherwise an expert from our industry or the sport who has a substantial idea about the same, can basically shed some light on it, which hopefully is good enough and understandable by most, so that it brings clarity on the topic, eventually ensuring flight safety for one and all. So now, without further ado, let's get this going and let's dive right into our very first question. And that is this just another paragliding podcast? Well, I mean, to be honest, this is a tricky one. But I mean, if I have to put it simply, I would say kind of yes and kind of no. The reason why I say yes is because primarily it's inspired by every other podcaster in our sport who has had the courage to go the extra mile and put in an effort in making something meaningful for the community by sharing the knowledge and making it accessible to pilots across the globe. Now, to touch upon that point on how it differs from other podcasts, first and foremost, when I felt the need to have a centralized system for information sharing in the most convenient manner possible to the masses, I mean, I agree there are multiple trustworthy sources available on the internet, which allows us to fulfill our curiosities for when it comes to asking questions about the sport. But past years, I have seen one of the most convenient ways to reach out to other community members was on Facebook, and most notably on Paragliding Forum page, which all of us know, when we seek about some recommendations about a new flying place, or every time we are planning to book a paragliding holiday. Yeah, basically exploring a new unfamiliar territory. And oftentimes I've seen that the information is multi-directional. I mean, don't get me wrong, most of the ones commenting over there, with the exception of course, a few trolls, are giving their best possible advice. But more often than not, it gets a bit confusing, and to be fair, a bit too much to follow sometimes, as well as the threads in the comment kind of go on endlessly. So then I kind of felt the need to consolidate all the required information in one common place, which can become a go-to guide for you whenever you plan to fly in a new place. And I agree that every medium has its own limitations, and a 60 to 90 minute episode on an average doesn't comprehensively dive into every single detail of a place. But we try our level best to touch upon the most important topics, which kind of hopefully provides you with bare necessities that one requires to know before planning to book their flying holiday in a location of their choice. And that is why Paragliding Atlas originated. Now, moving on, let's take on the second question of this Ask Me Anything episode, and that is that a listener asked, how do we choose our speakers and guests for the show? To put it simply, I think for this one, I would say basically when it comes to deciding upon a particular guest about an episode, the first and foremost things that I consider is the willingness of the person to share their knowledge. Because no matter how enriching the encyclopedia is, it's of no use if you cannot access it. So their willingness and their keenness to make paragliding a better place for all, regardless of their commercial interest, is the deciding factor in choosing the guest speaker. And once that's established, I try to look at their knowledge base and their experience in the sport and a few other factors And this is often complemented by a legacy factor, as the background of some of our guests is usually rich of having a long-standing and credible history in the sport. And oftentimes we try to choose a guest which has a great local influence. Ideally, they're from this certain location that we are discussing, or have been there very often, or kind of have moved there recently. So as long as they know it like the back of their hand, they are a good choice for Paragliding Atlas. And with that being said, I'd move on to our third question, in which a listener asked, how trustworthy is the information which is shared on our show? To be honest, this is again a very tricky one, and I think for this one, the easiest way for me to be diplomatically correct is that I leave the decision up to you guys, the listeners. You can decide what you want to take away and what not to. And the reason why I'm saying it so frankly is that because quite simply, none of the teaching methods or like the way we impart knowledge in the sport is being verified or monitored by a central legislative structure or an agency which determines its accuracy. And quite literally, a lot of work in our sport is being done on a semi-professional basis. Which brings up to the fact, which I should highlight, that, while everybody does their own bit in the best interest of flying community as a whole, and everyone tries to provide their information by the best of their knowledge and heart, I mean, humans are still humans, and we all can inadvertently make some mistakes. So to sum it up, I would say I strongly encourage our listeners to do their own research and not follow any advice that is being put out on this show blindly. And in fact, this is relevant not just to this show, but to almost every single instance when someone is imparting knowledge in the sport. None of the instructors, none of the fellow pilots or airmen who share the sky are trained professionally in a university-level PhD-style education to impart knowledge in our sport. And it's primarily a hobby or a side job for most instructors or pilots out there. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some truly inspiring figures in our sport who have put in the work and their laurels show their trustworthiness. But a lot of people are delivering information which might not be true even if they are doing it by the best of their intentions. And in fact, one thing from my personal experience that I've learned over past few years of flying is that usually asking someone the number of hours they have flown in their lifetime will give you a fair bit of idea about how much that person knows. And I would like to clarify once again that this by no means is a wholesome statistic. But on a general note, this resonates even when I talk to my guests, that airtime does make you a lot more wiser in understanding the dynamics of navigating air safely. And in fact, to clear it out, let me use this opportunity to make a disclaimer here. I've been meaning to put this out in the end of every show, and I think we'll make that a habit from now on in every show notes for the forthcoming episodes. And that is that the data that is being published on Paragliding Atlas is solely for the interest of information sharing for the sake of flight safety in paragliding. Every effort is being made to ensure the information and analysis contained on this podcast are as accurate and complete as possible. But please do take your own precautions while following the advice, as eventually any action you take while practicing the art of flight is entirely at your own risk. The information in this podcast is not intended and cannot replace an individual advice of a well-qualified professional instructor in the relevant field at the time of flight. So I would highly encourage you to evaluate the accuracy, the completeness, and the usefulness of all opinions, advice, and other information that you are being provided through the show. Our number one goal is to offer the most extensive online informative resource to the worldwide paragliding community. We desire to spread the undeniable idea that knowledge is useless unless you share it. And more aviation knowledge means fewer accidents. We strongly encourage flight safety. And with this, it brings us to the last question of this Ask Me Anything episode. That is, what do we have in store for 2024? Now, this one excites me, guys. I mean, when I was planning this project, of course, the whole thing about bringing knowledgeable and trustworthy information was paramount. Like, there's no second thoughts about that. But then it hit me that there's a lot more in our sport that needs to be talked about than just information sharing about specific locations. And then when I was doing a little bit more introspection about like what all topics would add value to you, the listeners of the show, I thought I'd select some very few carefully narrowed down topics that are usually a part of a discussion in a landing zone, or to say, the usual banter in a group of pilots. Now, to go about this, basically, my plan is to get the industry experts and known athletes who have proved their mettle and have been able to touch the sky with glory and continue to do so. We start by picking up one topic and then discuss various aspects of it in a multi-dimensional way, which hopefully covers it in a comprehensive manner and allows pilots to get some more clarity on the subject matter. To give a few examples, I can say one of the first and foremost points of discussion in our sport almost constantly is about managing stress and anxiety. Like, be it on the ground, in the air, during the competitions, or in the middle of an SIV, stress and anxiety are a big part of the sport. Some people, including me, the first forward launch in zero wind or the reverse launch in low wind. There are multiple such points which require expert knowledge, and probably one of these figures or these guests that we talk to will be able to help us manage our stress and anxiety much, much better, eventually resulting a better flight and a more enjoyable time in the air. Then we also have a topic of progression and raising the bar safely every time. We have competition flying planned in the ranks. This is followed by bivy flying and airtime in hours, and managing your whole flying calendar in areas to talk about where you go. And these are all succeeded by a bit more complicated and behind the scenes subjects of new technologies, because we often see new wings coming out. There's always some brand or some test pilot going out there pushing the limits and saying that, wow, I found this really new wing. It's collapse resistant and it's flying better, or it's a brand new profile and new canopies or new materials are coming out. So that one is a super interesting topic as well, and we're going to bring in some qualified and lead designers of all the brands that are leading the market. Certification is another thing that has been on the back of my mind. A lot of people talk about that, is it really worth it? And if yes, then how? And which certification is really mattering? Because now we have high B, low B, and kind of high C and low C, and multiple such instances where, it's kind of becoming complicated. So I think that is really important to touch upon as well. And then finally, we do move on to reading the weather systems, or to put it simply, meteorology in general, where this topic is basically lifelong learning. And as a lot of guests have said, that airtime helps a lot in understanding generally about the area, the sky, and the way you behave. So meteorology is a big topic that is going to come up. And then equipment managing, how do you which equipment is good for what kind of flying, and then, kit recommendations. And, after this, it's a whole ecosystem basically of knowing what you need to be a wholesome pilot in the sport of paragliding. One thing that I would like to mention is that we also plan to divulge into managing different sports and disciplines at the same time. We see a lot of pilots, switching to acro, switching to accuracy, flying smaller wings and speed flying. And now we have this para-kite concept, which is coming up. So that is another topic that will be discussed later on in the year. And I must mention one of the main topics that really will be valuable to everyone is how to make a living out of this sport. And as I've mentioned in the last episode, that everyone wishes for it, but very few are able to actually do it and thrive and basically not just survive from this kind of lifestyle, So unlocking secrets to all of these topics that I've just talked about will be paramount in time to come. I would say if you know someone, or if you yourself who are listening could add value to the community or would like to come on the show, shoot me an email at aninder@paraglidingatlas.com. The correct spelling of this is also mentioned in the show notes in the episode description below. I think with that, we have come to a wrap. And I would like to say massive thank you to, once again, every single one of you guys. Drum roll, please. It's been a real pleasure so far. Can't wait to get this going. And as I said earlier, stay excited, stay tuned. The magic has just begun. And on that note, I wish each and every one of you a very happy and a successful new year. Fly safe and touch the sky with glory.